Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're talking about something pretty heavy.
Yeah, we're looking at the potential economic fallout of, well, a hypothetical World War III.
Right. And our information for this dive comes from a preprint research paper. It's called Welcome to the World War III, WBB. The author is Mario Arturo Ruiz Estrada.
It's a fascinating attempt, really, to quantify the economic damage, to put numbers on it.
Exactly. So our mission here for you listening is to get a handle on these potential consequences, across different scenarios without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Sounds good. The paper itself uses this thing called a WW3 simulator to try and model it all.
Okay, but before we get to the simulator, maybe some context. The paper does look back a bit, doesn't it, at how war and economies have mixed in the past.
It does, yeah. It makes a point about the 20th century. Wars then seem to have had a much bigger sort of negative economic ripple effect compared to the 19th century.
Bigger ripple effect, how so?
Well, the paper uses this term, economic leaking. Think of it like economic damage spilling over way beyond the countries actually fighting.
Ah, okay. Because of trade disruption and finance links, stuff like that.
Precisely. And it suggests this leaking was worse in the 1900s, especially the world wars, and led to, well, faster increases in poverty globally compared to earlier conflicts.
Economic leaking, that definitely sounds worrying for any potential modern conflict, given how connected everything is now.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to the simulator.
Right, the WW3 simulator. What's it actually looking at? What are the key factors it considers?
Okay, so it tracks 9 main things. It looks at the level of tension for a potential WW3 scenario. Then there's diplomatic strategy or, maybe the failure of it. Army size, naturally. Projected losses, both human and material. That economic leaking factor we just mentioned.
Got it.
Then something called economic degrowth, which is basically a measure of how much a country's GDP might shrink.
Okay, like negative growth, degrowth.
Exactly. And then post-war damage levels, any reconstruction plans, and finally something they call megadisk networks analysis.
Megadisk networks, what's that about?
It's essentially a way to map out all the complex economic links between countries, how hitting one part of the network could cause problems everywhere else.
Wow, okay, so it's trying to capture that interconnectedness, and the paper runs this for, 12 different conflict zones?
12 potential flashpoints, yeah.
All around the world.
Which ones really stood out to you in terms of showing the potential economic damage?
Well, several are quite sobering. The simulation for, say, Europe versus Russia.
Yeah.
That shows very high tension and potentially really significant losses for both sides, big economic decline.
And that impacts more than just Europe and Russia, presumably, through that leaking.
Oh, definitely. Same with the China versus Taiwan scenario. Again, high tension, and the simulator predicts really major damage, especially for Taiwan's economy, but with global ripples.
And what about the big ones, like U.S. versus China or U.S. versus Russia? Yeah, those scenarios, as you'd expect, show extremely high tension and the potential for incredibly widespread damage. I mean, we're talking about the world's largest economies in direct conflict.
Right, that's kind of the nightmare scenario. But the paper also looked at others, didn't it? Like the U.S. against Russian allies in Latin America, or the U.S. versus Iran.
It did.
Yeah.
And those are interesting because they highlight the asymmetry of conflict.
Asymmetry. How so?
Well, even if the overall global tension score isn't quite as high as, say, U.S.-China, the simulations predict that the smaller nations involved, like the Latin American countries or Iran in those examples, would suffer disproportionately huge economic losses compared to a superpower like the U.S.
Ah, I see. So it's not just about who has the biggest military budget. It's about economic resilience and vulnerability, too.
Exactly. That economic degrowth factor really hits some harder than others.
Can we put some rough figures on that? You mentioned economic degrowth for the Europe versus Russia scenario. What might that actually look like?
Sure. So for that scenario, the model forecasts, well, significant economic degrowth for the EU. You'd be looking at a major drop in GDP, job losses, businesses closing, a serious economic contraction. And similarly, for China versus Taiwan, the projection involves major economic losses, particularly hitting Taiwan hard because its economy is so reliant on global trade and production that would be massively disrupted.
Okay, so looking across all these 12 simulations, what's the overarching economic message? Is there any scenario where someone comes out okay, a winner?
Not really, no. That's maybe the starkest finding in the paper. The conclusion is pretty clear. There are likely no true economic winners in a large-scale modern World War III.
No winners at all.
The level of economic degrowth predicted for most involved nations, plus the unbelievably high cost and sheer length of time needed for reconstruction afterwards. It suggests the entire global financial system would be, well, severely damaged, maybe crippled.
Wow. So the bottom line from this research is pretty grim. A major global war today likely means catastrophic economic damage pretty much everywhere. Nobody escapes untouched.
That seems to be the core takeaway, yes. And it really makes you think, doesn't it?
I think so.
Well, the simulator itself kind of implies current diplomatic approaches might not be enough to prevent these outcomes. So it pushes you to consider what else is needed. How crucial are, better international cooperation and maybe totally new diplomatic strategies to even have a chance of avoiding this kind of economic devastation?
Yeah. Thinking about just how tangled up all our economies are now, the ripple effects could be almost unimaginable.
Exactly. It's a sobering thought about our interconnected world.
It certainly is. Thanks for walking us through this really important, if unsettling, piece of research.
You're welcome. Important to consider these things.